Years ago, I walked into my gym, set up the treadmill for fat loss, and was surprised to see it had me walking. I instantly increased the speed and assumed that the machine was faulty. Years later, I came across research to explain why walking could actually work. I'm Leon Figures, and I'd like to welcome you to part 2 of my 8-part series on the health benefits of walking. If the message resonates, if you find the content useful, consider hitting the like button, subscribing to the channel, and sharing it with someone who might find this information beneficial. One of the most common questions people ask when they start walking more is, will walking actually help me lose weight? And the answer is both yes and no. I know that's not the answer most people want to hear. Most of us want a simple answer. Walk and you'll lose weight, or walk and you won't lose weight. But the reality is a little more nuanced than that. Because when most people ask whether walking helps with their weight loss, what they're really asking is, will I get lighter on the scales? The problem is that the scales don't tell you the whole story. In fact, some of the most important changes happening inside your body might not show up on the scales at all. To explain this, I want to look at one of the more interesting walking studies I've come across. It's called the STRRIDE trial. STRRIDE stands for Studies of Targeted Risk Reduction Intervention Through Defined Exercise. A catchy name, I know. The study was conducted by Duke University Medical Center and published in the Journal of Applied Physiology. Now, what makes this study particularly useful is that the researchers weren't trying to sell you anybody a miracle exercise program. They weren't trying to prove that walking turns you into a fitness model. They wanted to answer a very simple question. What happens when overweight, sedentary adults continue doing nothing? And what happens when similar people start exercising? The researchers recruited 175 sedentary, overweight men and women. These weren't athletes, these weren't marathon runners, these were ordinary middle-aged adults who were carrying excess weight and living largely inactive lives. In other words, the sort of people many of us know, or perhaps the sort of people many of us used to be. The participants were split into 4 groups. The first group did absolutely nothing. No exercise, no lifestyle changes, they simply continued living as they had before. The second group performed a moderate amount of moderate intensity exercise. This worked out at roughly 12 miles of walking per week, or around 30 minutes of brisk walking 6 days a week. The third group did the same amount of exercise, but at a higher intensity. Instead of walking, they were jogging. The fourth group did a larger amount of exercise, but vigorously. The researchers also asked participants not to change their diet. Now that's important, because if people lose weight, we know it wasn't because they were suddenly started eating salads and drinking green smoothies. The researchers wanted to isolate the effects of exercise itself. They followed these participants for several months, measured something called visceral fat. Now visceral fat is different from the fat sitting under your skin. This is the fat that wraps itself around your organs. It's associated with heart disease, type 2 diabetes, insulin resistance, and a whole host of other problems. In many ways, visceral fat is more important than your body weight. And this is where all the study gets really interesting. The group that did absolutely nothing gained 8.6% visceral fat in just 6 months. Let that sink in for a moment. They weren't participating in a weight gain program. They weren't deliberately overeating. They simply continued being inactive. And over 6 months, the dangerous fat surrounding their internal organs increased by nearly 9%. That's a remarkable finding. Because when people ask, how much fat will I lose if I walk? They're often asking the wrong question. A better question might be, how much dangerous fat am I gaining by not walking? The study showed that inactivity comes with a cost. And often we don't notice that cost because it happens slowly. You don't wake up one morning and discover you've suddenly accumulated visceral fat overnight. It creeps up on you, month after month, year after year. The really good news is that the walking group largely stopped that process. Remember, these people were only doing around 30 minutes of brisk walking 6 times a week. Nothing extreme, no boot camps, no military style fitness programs, no marathon training, just regular walking. And that amount of walking was enough to prevent a significant accumulation of visceral fat. Now, here's where many people get frustrated because they hear that and say, well, that's all very nice, Leon, but did they actually lose weight? And that's where the study becomes really valuable. The researchers found that changes in body weight were relatively modest. The scales didn't always move dramatically, but the body fat and abdominal fat changed much more significantly. This is one of the reasons I always tell people not to become obsessed with the scales, because the scales only measure one thing: your total body weight. They don't tell you how much muscle you have, how much water you're carrying, how much visceral fat you're storing, or what's happening inside your body. Imagine two people, both weighing 16 stone. One has a large amount of visceral fat wrapped around their organs. The other has significantly less. The scales see them identical. Their bodies do not. The study also found something else that many people find reassuring. The walking group and the jogging group produce surprisingly similar outcomes. Think about that. Many people assume if they're not running, they're wasting their time. If they're not sweating buckets, they're wasting their time. If they're not gasping for breath, they're wasting their time. Yet this study suggests that simply getting moving consistently may be far more important than turning every workout into a suffering competition. For middle-aged adults especially, that's good news. Walking is accessible. It's a low impact. It's free. And most people can do it. And unlike many fitness programs, people actually stick to it. The highest exercise group in the study achieved the biggest improvements. These participants didn't just prevent fat gain, they actually reduced visceral fat by nearly 7%. So there appears to be a dose-response relationship. In simple English, the more exercise generally produced greater results. But what I find most encouraging is that you didn't need to be in the highest exercise group to see benefits. The walking group was already moving in the right direction. Now let's bring this back to the original question. Does walking make you lose weight? The honest answer is yes, it can. Walking burns calories. Walking increases energy expenditure. Walking can contribute to calorie deficit. And over time, that can absolutely help you lose weight. But I think the bigger lesson from this study is that the walking improves body composition and metabolic health even when dramatic weight loss isn't occurring. And that's more important because so many people quit too early. They often walk for a few weeks, step on the scales haven't moved very much, and they decide walking doesn't work. But what if dangerous visceral fat is decreasing? What if insulin sensitivity is improving? What if cardiovascular health is improving? What if you're preventing the accumulation of abdominal fat that would be otherwise be occurring? The scales don't tell you any of that. The truth is that walking isn't magic. It's better. It's sustainable. It's something that most people can continue doing for years. And in the health game, consistency beats intensity far more often than people realise. So if you're wondering whether walking helps you lose weight, the answer is yes. But don't make the mistake of judging its success purely by what the scales tell you, because according to the STRRIDE trial, some of the most important benefits of walking may be happening in places the scales can't measure. And that may be one of the best reasons to start walking today. Walking was a major part of fat loss for me personally. During the spring of 2025, I regularly walked an 8-kilometre circuit around my local parks and canals. I enjoyed those walks so much that on my days off, I would often do the route twice. Now, to be fair, walking wasn't the only thing I was doing. I was following a much broader fat loss program. I was paying attention to my nutrition. I was exercising in other ways, and I was generally becoming much more health conscious. So I can't sit here and tell you that walking alone was responsible for all of my results. But what I can tell you is this. Walking became one of the habits that I consistently returned to. Without a doubt, it played a major role in my personal fat loss journey. What I particularly liked about walking was that it didn't feel like punishment. I could listen to a podcast, listen to music, think through ideas, or simply enjoy being outdoors. And because I enjoyed it, I kept doing it. When autumn arrived and the weather became less inviting, I didn't stop walking. I simply adapted. The outdoor walks became incline treadmill walks. The habit stayed the same, only the location changed. And I think that's an important lesson. Don't become obsessed with how you walk. Focus on whether walking works for you. If walking helps you lose fat, helps you improve your health, or helps you stay consistent with your goals, then find a way to make it part of your routine. Whether that's walking through your local park, walking around your neighborhood, walking on a treadmill, or walking whilst listening to your favorite podcast, the best walking routine is the one you still be doing 6 months from now. That brings us to another useful study, because this one looks directly at people who were already trying to lose weight, and I completely understand that. When I started taking my health seriously, one of the first things I wanted to know was, what's actually worth my time? If I'm going to spend 30 minutes walking every day, is it genuinely going to make a difference, or am I just kidding myself? And that's what I wanted to explore in this video. Not opinions, not social media influencers, not gym bros shouting at you from behind the ring light. Let's look at what happened when researchers actually put walking to the test. The study I'm talking about was published in the Journal of Nutrition in 2017 by Kleist and colleagues. Now, what I like about this study is that it looked at real people, not elite athletes, not marathon runners, not 20-year-olds with six packs. The study involved 82 overweight, obese adults. The average age was just under 40 years old. The average body weight was around 99 kilograms, which is roughly 15.5 stone. The average BMI was just under 32. In other words, these were ordinary adults carrying excess body fat, the sort of people who often find themselves standing in front of the mirror thinking, I really need to do something about my weight. The researchers split the participants into two groups. The first group followed an energy-restricted diet. Basically, they reduced calories. The calorie reduction was around 500 to 800 calories per day. The second group followed exactly the same diet, but there was one important difference. They also walked. Not ran, not sprinted, not high-intensity interval training, not burpees, not boot camps. They simply added moderate walking to the plan. And when I say moderate walking, we're not talking about crazy amounts. The participants walked around 2.5 hours per week. That's approximately 150 minutes per week, around 20 minutes per day. You could even think of it as 30 minutes a day, 5 days a week. Most people watching this video could realistically achieve that. Now here's the thing where things become interesting. At the end of 12 weeks, both groups had both lost weight. So right away, we can see that the calorie deficit was doing its job. The diet-only group lost 7 kilograms. That's just over 15 pounds. Pretty impressive. The diet plus walking group lost 8.8 kilograms. That's around 19 pounds. So the walking group lost an extra 1.8 kilograms. Now, statistically speaking, that difference narrowly missed significance. But before you switch off thinking walking doesn't matter, keep listening, because the most important finding wasn't actually about weight loss, it was about fat loss, and those are not the same thing. When most people step on the scales, they assume weight loss equals fat loss, but your body weight is made up of lots of things: fat, muscle, water, food sitting in your digestive system. All sorts of things contribute to your weight. So the researchers looked specifically at fat mass, and this is where walking started to shine. The diet-only group lost 4.8 kilograms of fat. That's good. But the diet plus walking group lost 6.4 kilograms of fat, an extra 1.6 kilograms of fat loss. And unlike the weight loss difference, this result was statistically significant. In simple English, the people who walked lost more fat. And that's what most people actually want. Because let's be honest, Nobody wakes up and says, I'd love to lose some muscle and water today. Most people want to lose body fat. That's the goal. Now think about what this means in the real world. Imagine two people both lose 8 kilograms. On paper, that sounds identical, but one person loses more body fat and retains more of the things they want to keep, and that's a better outcome. And that's exactly what the study suggests. Walking didn't just help people become lighter, it helped them become leaner. And personally, I think that's a much more useful measure of success. Now, the researchers didn't stop there. They also looked at something called fasting insulin. Now, insulin is a hormone that helps regulate blood sugar, but chronically elevated insulin levels are often associated with obesity, insulin resistance, and type 2 diabetes. So this is a really important marker. The walking group experienced significant improvements in fasting insulin. They also improved something called HOMA-IR. That's a measure of insulin resistance. Now, most people won't care about the fancy scientific name. What matters is what it means. It means their bodies became more efficient at handling blood sugar. They were becoming metabolically healthier. And here's the thing, nobody can see that in the mirror. Nobody notices it on Instagram. Nobody compliments because their insulin sensitivity improved. But from a health perspective, it matters enormously. In many ways, it's more important than the number on the scales. The researchers also looked at resting metabolic rates. This is particularly interesting because a lot of people worry that dieting destroys their metabolism. You've probably heard somebody say, don't diet, you'll wreck your metabolism. Well, these researchers actually measured it. What they found was participants lost significant amounts of weight without experiencing dramatic collapse in metabolic rate. That's encouraging because it suggests that sensible dieting combined with walking can produce meaningful results without metabolic disaster some people fear. Another thing worth mentioning is that both groups reduced their waist circumference. That's exactly what you'd expect when people lose weight, but the walking group still achieved superior fat loss results despite similar reductions in waist measurements, again suggesting that walking was improving the quality of the weight loss. Now let's talk practical application. Both studies are only useful if we can apply them. What I love about this research is that the walking dose wasn't ridiculous. 2.5 hours a week, that's it. No expensive gym membership, no special equipment, no personal trainer, no punishment, just walking. And not even huge amounts. That's one of the reasons I think walking is so powerful. People actually do it. A perfect exercise program that nobody sticks to is worthless. A simple walking habit that somebody maintains for years can completely transform their health. So let's come back to the question we started with. Does walking make you lose weight? The answer is yes, but this study suggests that's not the whole story. Walking appears to do something even more valuable. It helps more of the weight you lose come from fat. It helps improve insulin sensitivity. It helps improve metabolic health. And it helps you become leaner rather than simply lighter. The people in this study weren't doing anything extreme. They weren't dieting. They weren't walking. And over 12 weeks, they achieved meaningful improvements in body composition and health. So if you're currently trying to lose weight, don't underestimate walking. Because according to this study, dieting made people lighter, but walking made people leaner. And personally, I think that's a much more impressive result. Now, the final study I want to discuss takes things to another level, because up until now, we've looked at individual studies. We've looked at specific groups of people, scientific interventions, specific outcomes. But one of the changes with any individual study is that people can always say, well, that's just one study. And technically, they'll be right. That's why researchers sometimes perform something called a systematic review and a meta-analysis. Rather than looking at one study, they look at all the high-quality studies they can find on a particular topic and analyse them together. Think of it as zooming out. Instead of looking at one tree, you're looking at the whole forest. And that's exactly what researchers led by Chang did in 2021. The study was published in a journal of obesity, and rather than carrying out a new walking experiment themselves, they gathered together evidence from dozens of existing studies. In total, they analysed 34 randomised control trials involving 2,000 participants. Now, from a scientific perspective, that's a very powerful approach because we're no longer talking about what happened in one group of people on one location. We're talking about patterns that repeatedly appear across many different studies. And the question they wanted to answer was simple. What type of exercise is most effective at reducing visceral fat? Now, by this point in the video, you've heard me mention visceral fat quite a few times, and that's because visceral fat is not just a cosmetic tissue. This isn't the fat sitting under your skin. This is the fat wrapped around your organs, your liver, your pancreas, your intestines, and excessive visceral fat is strongly associated with type 2 diabetes, insulin resistance, cardiovascular disease, and a whole range of metabolic health problems. In many ways, it's one of the most important types of fat we can reduce. So what did Chang and his team discover? Well, perhaps the most important finding was that aerobic exercise consistently reduced visceral fat. Now, aerobic exercise is simply exercise that raises your heart rate and keeps it elevated for a sustained period. Walking, cycling, jogging, swimming, activities like that. And what I found particularly encouraging was that the researchers identified a dose that most people could realistically achieve. The most effective programs generally involved around three exercise sessions per week, sessions lasting between 36 minutes. These programs typically ran for 12 to 16 weeks. Now think about that for a moment. 3 sessions a week, 30 to 60 minutes for roughly 3 to 4 months. That's not exactly an extreme fitness program. That's not the sort of schedule that requires you to quit your job, hire a personal trainer and live in a gym. It's actually very achievable. And for many people, that could simply be a brisk walking. What I love about this finding is that it challenges the idea that exercise only works if it's miserable. You know the mindset, if you're not crawling off the treadmill, if you're not sweating through the 3 shirts, if you're not gasping for air, then somehow it doesn't count. The evidence simply doesn't support that. The researchers found that moderate aerobic exercise was capable of reducing visceral fat. In other words, your body responds to consistency, not just intensity. Now don't get me wrong, the study also found that high intensity interval training could reduce visceral fat as well. But here's the important point. You didn't need high intensity interval training to get results. And I think that's incredibly important for the audience of this channel because many of us aren't 20-year-olds. Many of us have old injuries. Many of us have arthritis. Many of us have dodgy knees. Many of us carry extra weight. And many of us have demanding jobs and family commitments. The perfect exercise program is useless if people can't stick to it. And that's where walking has such a massive advantage. Most people can walk. Most people can recover from walking. Most people can do it consistently. And consistency is where the magic happens. Another thing this study highlighted is something I've seen repeatedly throughout my own health journey. People expect results too quickly. They'll start walking, do it for 2 weeks, maybe even 4, then step on the scales and decide it isn't working. But the interventions in this review generally lasted 12 to 16 weeks, 3 to 4 months, not 3 to 4 days, not 3 to 4 weeks, 3 to 4 months. That's an important distinction because health improvement often happens gradually. Visceral fat doesn't appear overnight and it usually doesn't disappear overnight either. What we're really talking about here is changing the direction of travel. Imagine you're driving towards a cliff. You don't need to instantly teleport somewhere else. You just need to start moving in a different direction. Walking does that. You might not see dramatic change immediately, but over the months and years, the destination becomes completely different. And this study really reinforced something that's emerged from the previous studies we've discussed. The STRRIDE trial showed that walking helped prevent dangerous visceral fat accumulation. The CLI study showed that walking improved fat loss during dieting. And now the Chang and colleagues have shown that when researchers analysed dozens of studies together, aerobic exercise consistently reduces visceral fat. 3 different studies, 3 different research approaches, 3 different groups of researchers, yet all pointing to remarkably similar direction. And that's when scientific evidence starts becoming compelling, because we're no longer relying on one study, we're looking at a pattern. Now let's come back to the question we started with in this video. Does walking make you lose weight? After looking at all of this research, I think the answer is actually more interesting than a simple yes or no. Yes, walking can absolutely contribute to weight loss. It burns calories. It increases energy expenditure. It helps create the conditions needed for fat loss. But I think the bigger story is this. Walking appears to improve body composition. Walking appears to reduce dangerous visceral fat. Walking appears to improve metabolic health. Walking appears to improve insulin sensitivity. And walking appears to help people lose more fat when combined with sensible nutrition. In other words, walking doesn't just make people lighter, it helps make them healthier. And if I'm being honest, I think that's a much better goal, because anybody can lose weight temporarily. People do it every January, then gain it back in Easter. What we're really looking for is something sustainable, something we continue doing for years, something that improves our health while fitting into our actual lives. And that's where walking stands apart from almost every other form of exercise. It's accessible, it's free, it's low impact, and according to a growing body of scientific evidence, it works. Not because it's extreme, not because it's fashionable, but because people can keep doing it long enough for the benefits to accumulate. And that may be the most powerful thing about walking of all. Walking is free, easy, and almost everybody blessed with the ability to do it. It is one of the easiest things we could incorporate into our fitness regimes permanently. If you aren't a fan of jogging or running, then start walking may be what's best for you. You get one body, fuel it properly.